Good morning. My name is Brian D. Robertus, and I'm a vascular surgeon with the Division of Vascular Surgery at UCLA, and I work in the Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. Well, there are a number of new modalities for treatment of infrainguinal arterial occlusive disease, and all of these have obviously been compared against the gold standard of surgical bypass. In general, any of these minimally invasive technologies are less invasive and better tolerated for the patients, but they're not necessarily on par with the superior patency of a bypass graft, especially one with the patient's own conduit of a autogenous vein. The results of balloon angioplasty in general, balloon angioplasty has been around for quite some time, since the early 80s, I would say. And the problem with balloon angioplasty is you get a considerable amount of recoil, especially in the femoral and popliteal arteries, and this has required stenting in many cases. The problem with balloon angioplasty alone is the patency rate for that treatment modality ranges from 30 to 50% at 1 year. When you add the addition of self-expanding nitinol stents, you can achieve patency rates of between 60 and 80% in some cases. But these are still, these are still poor compared to surgical bypass. And when you look at longer lesions or long total occlusions, the patency rate diminishes considerably. So most of the stent trials have been done with lesion lengths under 7 centimeters. And the patency rates for those over 7 centimeters is much less. So there are other newer modalities that have come out, such as atherectomy, in which you excise the plaque, either with an excisional atherectomy device or an orbital atherectomy device where you sand down the plaque before treating it with a balloon. These are allowing us to treat longer lesions, but still there's some patency concerns and questions. So the newest technology available, or the newest technology coming to market these days, includes drug-coated stents and drug-coated balloons. So when you're looking at the when you look at the clinical trials that have been evaluating drug-coated balloons, there are a number of trials, and they differ between the femoral popliteal circulation and the tibial circulation. The femoral popliteal circulation has been fairly well studied with a number of clinical trials. Mostly trials that have been performed in Europe, although there have been some trials performed in the U.S. as well. The most recent one was the Medtronic data presented at Charing Cross just a few weeks ago. Prior to that, the results of the Medtronic drug-coated balloon below the knee was presented at the Link conference in Leipzig, Germany back in January. Most of the SFA trials comparing these modalities have compared drug-coated balloons to non-drug-coated balloons or simple balloon angioplasty. And in almost across the board, these trials have shown a patency advantage to those treated with the drug-coated balloons. The patency rate is somewhat modest. It's on the order of 10 to 20% in many of the trials, but they certainly have shown an improved patency in the majority of them. One of the patterns you tend to see in patients treated with drug-coated balloons is they do suffer restenosis, but it tends to be more focal in nature than those patients treated with balloon angioplasty without an adjuvant drug. I think that is a big deal, and that is consistent with other drug-coated balloon trials in Europe looking at the femoral and popliteal circulation. As I mentioned earlier, balloon angioplasty alone has a patency rate of 30 to 50%. Once you add the addition of a self-expanding nitinol stent, the patency rate goes up to the 60 to 80 range. There's one trial that shows a woven nitinol stent that has recently become available in the U.S. has patency rates over 80% at 1 year. So these are pretty good patency rates, and they come close to surgical bypass. The problem with stents is that once they do develop restenosis, either due to stent fractures or the chronic outward radial force of the stent, the challenge is retreating these patients. Once you have a stent in place, it's hard to retreat those patients, especially if that stent occludes completely. So the goal for atherectomy or drug-coated balloons is to try to achieve that stent-like primary patency rate, but without leaving a device behind in the patient. And that's really where the drug-coated balloons do pretty well. 82% primary patency is very respectable for 1 year. Again, it's close to that of surgical bypass. And this study presented at Charing Cross is, like I said earlier, consistent with the other trials that have been done in Europe primarily. I think that the results of this trial are probably obtainable by a number of products that will become available eventually. There is definitely a difference from one balloon to the next, but it largely has to do with the combination of the drug and the carrier. So a drug-coated balloon without a carrier is most likely not a good long-term solution because number one, you can lose a lot of the drug during delivery of the balloon. So when you take this balloon out of the package, you have to pass it through a catheter and a sheath and through the vessel itself, and there's many opportunities for losing some of the drug either in the delivery systems of the device or downstream in the circulation. So it will go down to basically the blood flow will carry some of the drug down to the foot and not implanted in the vessel where it's needed. So having the right combination of carrier and drug is an important part of this process, because what you really need to do is to deliver that drug to the vessel wall and have a release into the vessel wall that allows it to get to the adventitial and the medial layers of the vessel. So the device itself does make a difference. The Medtronic data for their SFA trial is among the best of that data available in terms of the patency rates. But most devices should be able to obtain that. And I would say those primary patency rates at 1 year of over 75 or 80% is really the goal that manufacturers of drug-coated balloons should be shooting for, because those are the patency rates that by and large are obtainable with stents, which are what's commonly used now for most of our patients that we treat with percutaneous interventions. Yeah, I would say first off, although the gold standard is certainly surgical bypass, the truth of the matter is the vast majority of my patients and the vast majority of many vascular surgeons' patients are treated with interventional means, percutaneous intervention. So I personally use a combination of atherectomy, stents, and balloon angioplasty, depending on the patient and the lesion type. So I think that these type of results, if they are sustainable in other clinical trials and real-world clinical experience, it's enough to shift a lot of people from using stents over to balloon angioplasty alone, or drug-coated balloon angioplasty. But you really do need to look at the specific data and the specific location where the device is used and the lesion characteristics. All of these are important, and if you choose the right patients in a clinical trial and get an 80% primary patency rate at 1 year, and then you apply that treatment modality to a broader population of patients who have very different lesions, you may find that the data doesn't hold up in the long term. So I imagine that these type of studies and this somewhat groundbreaking data is important to expand this technology and further disseminate its use. But you also have to watch what those results are in real-world patients down the road.